just, I think, a great way to do it. It's easy to like toss around as you're moving your project in different parts of the house or sitting on the couch, which I do a lot when I'm cross stitching. So that is thread organization. The next part of this has to do with more the active use of your threads in your project. And that brings me to tip number 2, which is needles for every color. I know that sounds like a lot of needles, but I promise you it is worth it. I literally just put a needle in each bag with each color. They have never poked through. It's never caused any kind of problem if that's what you're worried about. I've never lost a needle from out of these bags. So that works really well for me so far. And using a needle for every color means that you don't have to thread your needle constantly, because you're only having to thread a needle when you reach the end of a thread and are like reloading that color onto that needle. So I love that tip. I don't know if that's a really common thing to do. Maybe it is. I'm sure that lots of other people do it. But I just figured that out kind of in the last year, and it was like mind-blowing because I had spent all this time threading needles that I didn't need to be threading. So I know for me, I needed to buy a bunch of needles the same size because I have a particular size that I like to use for embroidery, and that is a DMC number 26. Even this one is a little bit small. Maybe if you like to have a bigger needle, you'd probably want to do something bigger than a 26, but that's what works for me. I found on Amazon a set of 3 packs of needles that are all the same size for really cheap, 12 or 13 bucks. I will link that below also in case you wanted to buy the same ones. But yeah, so now I have 18 needles that are the same size that I like for every color that I'm working on with this pattern, and it has made my life so much easier. So needles for every color. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is starting in the very middle of your pattern. I will show you how to do that. Basically, every pattern is going to have a middle, obviously. Most patterns will have these arrows showing you where the middle is so that it is easy to find. So you just find the middle, and then what I do, and again, this is not my own idea, this is like common knowledge, but you're a beginner, so I thought it might be helpful to you. What you do is you take your fabric and you fold it in half, and then you fold it in half again, and there is your approximate middle, and that's where you start. Super simple. What I usually do is I honestly just grab a needle and I stick it through this middle, and then I put it back on my ring with the needle sticking out of it, and I know exactly where to start. This is especially great if you're not using a kit but working just like with your own supplies with what you have on hand. For instance, you can see that this piece of cross-stitch fabric that I have is not even close to the same shape as this pattern. This is a rectangle, this is a square. So I think that's especially helpful. If you're not working with like the exact number of squares that you need, then you at least know where the middle is, and then I always work out from there when I'm working with a pattern, and I think that helps a lot. The next tip has to do with actually working with your needle and thread on your pattern. Basically, this applies only when you're working with like something that's going to hang on a wall like what I'm doing. If you're working with a piece of fabric that's like going to be worn or is like going on a bag or something like that, you probably do want to knot the beginning and end of every thread piece so that you don't end up accidentally with a thread that's, you know, coming undone. But if it's just going on a wall and it's just going to be sitting still and it's going to be all encased in a frame, you don't really actually need to knot the beginning and end of every thread that you're starting. That is a huge waste of time in my opinion, and there are faster ways to get things going and finish things off that don't involve so much knotting and cutting and all that kind of stuff. So let me show you.
I always wanted to be a real piano man. So I downloaded this app called Simply Piano.
What I mean. So first of all, let's say that we need to start a new color section. I have my dark thread right here that's going to start a new section with the stitch going right here. I think this one's a good one to show you just because there's not too many other things around it so that it doesn't get too visually confusing. So what you need to do is put your needle through where it's going to start. So as you're running this needle all the way through, you want to hold on to this piece of thread and don't let go of it as you get close to the end. And I honestly just hold it with these fingers. I don't let go of this as I am working the needle or working the stitch on the other side rather. Usually usually you're not going to be seeing this. This is going to be on the underside. So let me flip it back over so that you can see. I just wanted to show you like what I'm doing down here so that it doesn't get too confusing. I'm literally just holding this thread in place. So I have my fingers holding this thread in place on the underside like I showed you. And I'm just going to make the stitch like I normally would, except that my fingers on the underside are holding this thread in place so that it doesn't get pulled all the way through. Because a cross stitch is almost kind of like a little knot. You're kind of going, putting it back over itself a couple times, which means that once you complete this stitch, you don't need to have a knot there. There's no reason to. So we're just finishing this stitch, and then I'll show you the underside. So easy and simple, and you don't have to worry about anything. So there's what the underside looks like. It literally just holds itself in place, and you don't have to worry about anything. Sometimes if the tail gets a little bit too long like this, I'll even chop it a little shorter just so that it doesn't get pulled up by any other stitches that you make. But that's literally all I do. I don't do any kind of knot or anything. I just hold it in place while I make the stitch so that it doesn't get pulled all the way through, and we call it good. Oh, that was the first half of this tip in starting this thread in the easiest way possible. But what about ending it? Ending it can be just as easy. This is what I do. This is the stitch that I just made. I have the same thread in my hands. I'm going to end it by literally just running it through the underside of a couple of these other nearby stitches. I just make sure to be careful not to catch it, so it's going on the outside. We don't want to see it obviously on the other side. So you just kind of make sure to run it through just the threads that you've done on this underside, pull it through, and then cut it off pretty short right there. And you know what? That thread is not going anywhere. It will stay there. It will not move. I have never, not once, had any thread come back up or do anything weird with this method of starting and ending. It is so basic, and it really does work. Okay, I really hope that number 4 made sense, and that you could see what was going on. The crux of the matter is just don't knot anything. Just don't knot it. You don't need to. It will stay. If you are careful and you're not rough on your fabric, and if it's just going in a frame after you're done with it, don't even bother knotting it. Knotting it just makes it more bulky and weird on the underside. That's tip number 4. Tip number 5 is making sure all of your stitches are going in the same direction. This takes practice. I still mess up on it sometimes too. I will go back and fix it usually because I really don't like how it breaks things up visually if things aren't going the same direction. But that is like the most basic part of cross stitch, is that all of the lines on the under of the cross are going the same way, and then the over are going the same way. You want them to look really uniform and even, because that is how your eye kind of can forget about all the X's that it's seeing and see the picture as a whole at the end of it. So let me show you a close-up of like what it looks like. It's so important to get this right. Go back and fix it if you mess up. That's my tip, is don't just go, oh well, I messed this stitch up, but I've already done 2 more stitches, so I'm not going to worry about it. Go back and fix it. Your pattern or your piece will look so much more clean and professional and perfect when it's done if you do, and you will regret it if you don't, I promise you. And tip number 6, count twice, stitch once. I think that the biggest part of cross stitch that people probably don't realize is how much counting is actually involved. Obviously, most patterns are grids, so you could work within, these square grids and do things that way. I think that is helpful for counting purposes, but that's not how I like to actually do the cross stitch. I like to just count out my stitches. So let me find a good example, and I will show you ways to make counting a little bit easier and make it, so that there's less chances that you'll mess up too. So I think a really good spot to demonstrate this is on these at legs. Obviously, there are these long strips of color that go up that can be kind of hard to count. Once you kind of get past like 10 stitches in a row, they kind of get hard to keep track of. So what I do instead is I count based off of the surrounding colors. So like I'll try to fill in some of the smaller patches first sometimes, and then go in with these bigger patches, because I think it's easier, for instance, if you're counting up, this area right here, instead of counting up, for this row it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That's a lot of stitches to count up to keep track of. Instead, what I do is I count 1, 2, 3 stitches, and then we pop over 1 row. 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, pop over 1 row. 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, pop over 1 row. 1, 2, 3 stitches till we get to the top of this orange bit. And I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I count. That makes it so much easier. And you can do that with really count based on the outline of the shapes before I count in the middle. So like instead of counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches down, I'll instead just go one diagonal down, one diagonal down, one diagonal up, one straight up, or one next to it, one diagonal up, two up, one over, two up, one over, two up, and I just kind of fill it in that way. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I think it's a lot easier to kind of go around the outlines of bigger shapes and or to just kind of count down these smaller patches instead of trying to do these long rows that are, it's a lot. So sorry, that was probably literally so confusing, but that's just how it works better in my head. This is why I left this tip for the end. If it's not helpful to you, at least all the other ones are already helpful and you're not going to click out of this video after this one crappy tip. But that is kind of how I do things. So if you guys have any more questions, if you guys want any more like resources for embroidery or cross stitch, if you want any more good patterns, I have friends that make really great embroidery kits. I have some favorite resources like shops on Etsy that I love. I'm happy to share, and let me know if you want me to make any more videos about all these hobby type crafts, because I honestly am always working on projects. I just don't share them all the time because so much of it is stuff I just figure out on my own or make up as I go along that I feel like I don't know quite what you might be interested in seeing, but I'm happy to share. I think it's so fun. So let me know. That was 6 tips to help you on your way to becoming a cross stitch master. I hope that was so helpful to you. If you like this video, please give it a like. That really helps me to know what you're enjoying seeing. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. I make fun content, and we're like so close to 1,000 subscribers, and then I can start getting paid for all this work. And that is really it for today. So thanks so much for watching. Catch you in the next one.